Like and subscribe for endless entertainment. Our story starts off with Hajime waking up in a cave. He begins looking for an exit but sees an adorable rabbit who goes on to test if all dogs go to heaven. Hajime trips and catches its attention, but it sees a gorilla and tries to run away, only to get multiplied and is now added to the food chain. Hajime tries to do the race but gets disarmed while the gorilla does a taste test. He opens a hole into the wall and begins backing away while putting up barricades against the gorilla, until he gets knocked out. He wakes up over a healing crystal and begins to cry. Hajime remembers that he was a part of a dungeon party, but he was very weak and had to be saved by a Monogawa. They see a crystal in the wall, so an adventurer goes for it and activates a trap that brings their party to a room filled with many high-leveled monsters. The party begins getting attacked, so a knight casts a barrier that gets easily broken. Hajime uses powers to form a wall from the bridge and tells them to escape while he holds them back, but the monsters begin to break through. The adventurers launch an all-out attack, so Hajime starts to retreat, but one of the spells targets him. He realizes that someone betrayed him as the bull comes down and destroys the bridge around them, so he falls into the abyss below. It's revealed that he was brought to this world with all his classmates to protect it, but he now decides to survive and smoke anyone who stops him from going home. Hajime sees a wolf in the distance that tries to add him to its diet, but it gets caught in his trap and is buried alive. He tries to eat the monster but begins feeling unimaginable pain while his body mutates and turns him into a badass. Hajime wakes up under the healing crystal and realizes that his stats have all increased, along with giving him access to his victim's ability while drastically improving his earth transmutation skill. Hajime uses all his knowledge and channels America to make pewers along with some bullets. He tests it on Bugs Bunny and brings it back to eat so he can gain its abilities. He decides it's time to hand out karma to the gorilla. It uses Fury Swipe, but he dodges and jumps in the air to aim like a stormtrooper and gets knocked down. Hajime throws a flashbang to disarm the monster and does a taste test in front of it. The gorilla dashes at him but gets the shock of his life, leaving Hajime to blow its mind. He gets up and decides to leave the abyss. He realizes that he can't climb up, so he tries to go down to find another route. He encounters a lizard that petrified his lamp and his stub. It crawls over him to get a flashbang along with a full course of America. On the surface, it's revealed that after Hajime fell into the abyss, Kaori tried to jump in after him, but they knocked her out and brought her back. Shizuku goes outside to practice and explains that when they were first summoned here, the Pope told them about a war between humans and demons. But when demons learned to control monsters, they wiped out the majority of humanity, so they were forced to summon heroes to fight for them. She notices that her classmate is acting nervous and goes over to question him, but he leaves. She goes back over to Kaori, who awakens from her coma. She asks for Hajime, but Shizuku tells her that he's in heaven. Best Girl tries to go find him, so Shizuku embraces her while she grieves for her loss. In the abyss, Hajime finds a door, but he has no idea how to open it. He tries to transmute it, but the door blows him off and summons two Cyclops to fight him. He gets a bullseye on one, so the other begins to block. Hajime continues to pew-pew him until its shield breaks, so it attacks him but earns a one-way ticket to heaven. He finds some balls in the monsters and places them inside the door so it can be opened. He goes inside and finds a cube that reveals a prison sentence. He walks away from the charge but begs him to release her because she was betrayed by someone. He goes back, so she explains that she is an unkillable vampire that protected her people, but one day her uncle overthrew her and sealed her in this abyss. He decides to transmute her prison and breaks the seal to free the vampire. She embraces his arms and asks him to name her, so he chooses to call her Yue because she reminds him of the moon. Spikes suddenly come from the wall, so he takes one for the team to save the immortal vampire. He pulls out the spikes and looks up to see a scorpion. He puts Yue on his back and starts blasting while dodging its poison, then throws a flashbang so he can reload. He uses dash to take the high ground and blasts him, but it does no damage. He lands on the ground where the lawsuit comes off his back and begins to suck out his fluid. Yue goes towards the scorpion and unleashes the sun to crush the monster, but it wasn't enough to take it down. Hajime asks her to do it once more and runs off. She drops another one so Hajime can go above it to solve the problem the American way. He begins to take out the crab meat while Yue reveals that the labyrinths were created by the messengers of gods who rebelled against their masters. So Hajime decides to try and find one to help them escape. He creates a railgun from the monster's loot box. They begin to traverse through the labyrinth together while they continue to go further down. He tells her that he plans to get stronger and one day go home, but Yue says she no longer has anywhere to return to, so he offers to bring her to his home when he goes back. They hear a rumbling in the distance and begins to run away from a herd of T-Rexes, but sees that flowers are controlling them. He escapes into a crack and goes to look for the mastermind behind the flowers. He sees an entrance to a cave and runs through the tight hole, then fills it up. They see pollens flying through the air, so he puts up a wall but notices that Yue is now being controlled by the flowers. He runs from her, but the pollen hits him. A caked-up vegan walks towards Hajime and holds the unkillable vampire hostage. She spawns a flower on his head, but it has no effect on him, so she uses Yue to fight. Hajime remembers that Yue is immortal and disarms the creature before showing it something mind-blowing. They set up camp where he offers to give her food, but she comes over to him and decides that she wants to feed on something else. Our duo finds a staircase that leads to the lower levels of the dungeon and begins to travel through unknown territory until they find a door. They enter the room and finds it covered with pillars along with another door at the end. A giant circle appears in the center of the room and spawns a hydra. It uses many different elemental magic on them, but they dodge and begins to serve it some pain. The white head heals all their damage. Yue launches a fireball at white, but the yellow takes one for the team. The black one goes in front of her and uses genjutsu. So Hajime goes over to blast the monster and brings her behind a wall. He feeds her with a potion to bring her back, but she's been traumatized. Hajime decides to catch a case and tells her that they will survive to go home together. Yue goes over to summon a storm to distract the monster. So Hajime can get close enough to charge his rifle and give 3 of the Hydra heads an outer body experience. The other 3 comes forth, but Yue cast an ability to give them a shocking surprise. Hajime begins going over to her, but White gets back up and decides to use Hyper Beam on the immortal vampire. Hajime takes one for the team and collapses on the floor. The Hydra launches another attack, but she uses a shield to protect them from the shower of death. She gives him a potion in the most normal way possible and takes his pure to run towards the monster. She jumps over its attack and pews him in the face, but White uses another hyper beam to blast her away. She crawls over for the weapon while the monster decides to fire at the immortal vampire. But Hajime saves her from taking no damage and tells Yue to suck out his blood to bring back her magic. He runs at the monster and begins pewing the ceiling, then throws grenades inside. He dodges its attack and detonates the boomers to bring the ceiling down on the Hydra and traps it under the rubble. Yue takes this chance to unleash the sun and give the creature a one-way ticket to hell. Hajime collapses, so she goes over and lay beside him as the doors finally open. He awakens and finds himself definitely going to prison. He gently wakes her up and she explains that after the door opened, she carried him inside and began to dress his wounds. They steal the fallen angel's stuff and begins wandering around ruins until they come upon a loot box in a chair. Hajime walks across a circle and activates a spell that brings forth a recording of the angel. He congratulates them on surviving the trials and downloads all the truth of the world into his mind, where he realizes that the fallen angels were actually doing good. He reveals that he has learned ancient magic, so he now has access to creative mode. They bury the angel and discovers a spell to take them to the surface. But Yue shows him that if they continue to conquer the labyrinth, they could find a way to return to his home. Months later, Hajime has built a new arm followed by 2 new rooms and a few more hole makers just in case. Our favorite duo goes to the teleportation circle and leaves to begin a new journey on the surface. Meanwhile, the adventurers go back to the bridge where Hajime fell into the abyss. A magic circle begins to spawn as the bull comes forth, but this time they will not run. Emanagawa uses Getsuga Tensho to cause the bull to charge, but Jimbro steps forward to hold it down while the knight fails to do damage, so Shizuku shows him how it's done, while Emanagawa goes in to give it a pinprick. The monster jumps at them, so they cast a barrier, but Kaori support magic comes in clutch to help push it back to make Nagumo finish it off with his final attack. They begin to celebrate, but Kaori still seems to be unhappy. Back on the surface, Shay waits for someone, but a T-Rex with an extra chromosome begins to chase her. The furry climbs away as a portal channels to summon Hajime and Yue to her location. She runs towards them and sticks the landing, but they choose to ignore her. The very special T-Rex roars at them, so Hajime shows it the spirit of America. He teaches the furry social distancing, then allows her to explain that her people are about to be wiped out by monsters and reveals that she has the ability to see into the future. He summons his vroom vroom and heads towards the furry tribe. Hajime decides that he will use her as bait so he can no-scope all the monster, then gently introduces her to the floor. Shay shows them her tribe and travels with them until they find another furry tribe that peacefully accepts them into their village. The tribe asks Hajime to train them to become stronger, but they have no idea how to fight. Hajime tells them they're gonna become a prison wife if they don't turn into alphas. Shay trains with Yue and distracts her with trees to sneak behind her for an ambush, but Yue dodges and turns her into an ice cube. She goes over to Hajime and boasts about her progress. Shay asks to join their party and reveals that she's fallen in love with him as the furries came back but are now savages. They take him to the great tree where he sees a pillar. He places the ring inside and is told to come back once he has gained the 4 labyrinth relics. He decides to leave the beastmen, so they beg him to join his party, but he tells them to train so when he returns they're strong enough to join him. Then they leave the forest carrying the caked up furry along with them. Our party searches for the entrance of a labyrinth, but Shay feels the need to water the rocks and accidentally finds the opening, but they don't know how to get in. Until Shay trips inside the hidden entrance. They begin to fight off monster that scares the fluid out of Shay. Then walk through the labyrinth and encounters an Indiana Jones trap that deactivates magic, so Shay takes care of it. They walk through many rooms with traps that our favorite bunny takes care of. But in the end, they find themselves back at the start. They wander around until they encounter the final room. They decide to send in Shay to test the waters. She goes in as the armor begins moving, so they begin destroying everything until they reach the door. Shay opens it so they can escape the armors, but they encounter a fallen angel. She asks why he wants to conquer her labyrinth, so he tells her that he just wants to go home. The angels decides not to help them, so Hajime shows her the light, allowing Shay to break her arms so he can introduce some lead to her chest. The angel rises again and drops Legos on them. Hajime dodges the attacks while holding his harem and comes behind her. He grapples to the angel and knocks her to the floor so Yue can freeze her in place. Hajime uses a device to penetrate her with a rod, but it wasn't deep enough, so Shay comes in to push it deeper and destroys the core. Yue gives Shay a good girl pat, as the robot turns on and warns them that if they learn all the ancient magic, they will become the enemies of God, and passes on to another world. Our party enters the final door and is surprised to find the angel still alive. Shay goes over and hand out punishment, then they enter the circle and learn gravity magic. She hands Hajime her ring, but he goes over to kindly request that she gives him all her shit. After getting robbed, the angel flushes them down her toilet, but on her way down Shay sees a fugly fish that scared her. They arrive on the land, but Shay drinks some water, so Hajime goes over and tries to give her CPR. Seeing her chance, Shay begins eating his face until he finds the strength to push her off of him. They go to an inn and try to get a room, but Shay and Yue begins arguing about who should sleep with Hajime. Then she shouts in front of everyone that she wants Hajime to be the first to clap her cheeks, so he decides to bust a few rounds in her. The next day they meet with the guild master. He gives them a mission to rescue a noble's son who went missing in the mountains, and after a little extortion Hajime accepts. He rides his vroom vroom and begins to get excited about stopping by a village to eat some rice. At the village, Hajime's teacher and classmates work on the farm. They decide to take a break and have some lunch when Hajime with his harem suddenly walks in. The teacher gets up and goes over to meet her student. He tries to leave, but she won't let him, so he starts eating while ignoring all her questions. The teacher gets upset, so the knight comes over and scolds them for eating with a furry, then forks around and finds out that he's not bulletproof. Hajime tells his class to forget that they ever found him and threatens to isekai anyone else that gets in his way. He begins cheering up Shay, and Yue reveals his deepest secret and says that he pets Shay's ears while she sleeps. They get up and leave the teacher at the restaurant. She goes home and decides to bring him back, but Hajime already solid snaked into her room. They sit down and he decides to tell her the truth of this world. Long ago in the Age of War, a group of people found out that their god was just using them as entertainment, so they tried to overthrow him. But the god turned the people against them, so they were massacred, forcing the few who remained to create labyrinths and give whoever overcame their trials knowledge and power. She questions if he'll fight God, but he refuses because he just wants to return home. The teacher tells him that Kaori always believed he was alive, so he warns the teacher to watch their backs because there is an imposter among them who tried to send him to heaven. Our party sets out on his adventure and sees the teacher is gathered with her students to join them. He tells her no, but she says that after this adventure they will leave him alone. He summons the vroom 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 and goes off into the mountain. They exit the harem carrier, where Hajime sends out drones that scatter into the forest and finds a battlefield filled with many broken weapons. They travel up the mountain until they find a waterfall. Yue pulls off a Moses so they can enter and find the missing noble inside. Hajime gently wakes him up, but the noble begins freaking out because a dragon smoked his party. Hajime embraces him and says that he shouldn't mourn for them but continue living on while remembering their sacrifice. They exit the cave, but a sudden wind blows them away. The dragon appears in front of them and uses solar beams, so Hajime summons a shield to tank the attack. He begins to struggle, but his classmates comes in clutch to hold it off. Yue uses gravity magic to knock it down so Shay can give it a pounding. The dragon gets back up and uses tail whip on Shay, then shoots a blast towards the noble, forcing Yue to play defense. The dragon charges another hyper beam, so Hajime counters with his BFG to match its attack and knock it down. He goes on the creature to fist it, then jumps off, but leaves it a little surprise. He summons the impaler and tries to penetrate it, but the dragon's too thick, so he calls Shay to come in and smash it into the ground to knock it out. Hajime grabs the spike and puts it where the sun doesn't shine. The dragon begins freaking out and begs him to pull out. He realizes that she is a dragonborn and begins to push it deeper to punish the freaky dragon girl until she submits to him. She says that she left her village to see the summoned heroes, but she stopped to have a rest. While she's sleeping, a mage placed her under a spell to attack the adventurers. The noble argues that she sent his friends to heaven, so Hajime decides to go all the way in. But Yue convinces him to spare her because she was being controlled by someone else. He decides to pull out the spike from the dragon's lap warmers, causing her to climax and transforms to her normal form. Tio tells them that a large army of monsters are marching to attack the nearby town, and reveals that she can give them a lift after a day of rest, but she can't move because Hajime was too rough with her. So he goes over and gently carries her across the floor. In the morning, Hajime begins making walls for defense while everyone else begins evacuating the civilians to prepare for the war. Night falls while Hajime admires his work. He notices that the freaky dragon has been stalking him, so she comes out and begs him to make her join his party while his harem watches. The army of monsters arrives. Hajime goes over and gives the citizens a speech that gives his teacher credit for saving them and claims that he is her sword. He summons his railgun to show them what technology can do. They begin the fight by spewing miniguns and fireworks at the poor bastards, followed by a stream of magic from Tio that she turns into a burning inferno to consume them, but Yue comes in and begins playing catch with the monsters. The battle turns into a tower defense game with the creatures standing no chance against the might of the Hole Makers. Tio runs out of magic and Hajime is out of bullets, so he takes Shay on the vroom vroom to go into combat to throw hands instead and gives them a mind-blowing experience. They slaughter all the creatures in their path until Hajime confronts the person behind the attack. He tries to run but falls off the wolf and is taken back to the village. It's revealed that he is their classmates, and he explains that when he went up into the mountain he met a demon that convinced him to take control of all the monsters so he can unalive his teacher. She takes his hands and tells him that she won't allow him to become evil, but he embraces her and put a needle at her breather. Shay suddenly jumps at them to take one for the team, so Hajime no-scopes whoever was trying to escape. He goes over to Shay, but she reveals that his teacher has been poisoned, so he feeds her a potion in the most normal way possible. Then goes over to Shay and heals her. The traitor begins bleeding out on the ground, so the teacher begs Hajime to save him. Hajime asks him if he is their enemy, so he says that he swears to be good. Hajime decides to book him a one-way ticket to heaven because he was lying, and leaves her to mourn for the loss of her student. Our party returns the noble to his home and they go to their room where Shay reminds Hajime that he promised to take her around town, but he sees that they're being watched. In the morning, Yue gently wakes up Tio, while Hajime and Shay goes out on their date. They see an aquarium and goes in to see the fugly fish. Hajime has a heart-to-heart with the unfortunate creature and it reveals that he was captured and imprisoned, so they sneak it out. They continue the date into town where Hajime senses someone under his feet. They go down and find a little one in the filth. They bring her to a room where Shay bathes and feeds her. Then Hajime comes in to dry her hair. She reveals to them that she was kidnapped and sold on the market. He carries her to the city guards and decides to leave her in their care. But while walking away, an explosion in the distance catches their attention. They head inside to see a note asking for Hajime to bring Shay to them or the little one gets hurt. So he decides to give them an ass beating. Yue and Tio sits having lunch. An explosion happens with Shay and Hajime arriving. He tells them what happened and reveals that they're gonna visit every gang until they find the culprit. Our party goes around condemning everyone they find to an early visit with God, until Hajime finds the boss and gives him a few more holes. He frees the girl and embraces her so he can bring her above the city and shows her the beauty of fireworks. He introduces the girl to the party, and they head off on the road with Shay taking the lead and giving them a view, until they reach a town. They go to visit the guild leader and gives him a note, but an adventure suddenly bursts through the door. It's revealed that he is Hajime's classmate, so he goes over and begs him to save the other adventurers left in the labyrinth. He explains that while they were exploring, they were suddenly confronted by a demon. She recognized Nagawa as the hero and asks him to join her. He refuses, so she summons monsters to knock them down, but Kaori comes in to heal everyone. They all began fighting back against the demons, but they were too strong and they were only able to barely survive the onslaught. Shizuka tells her classmate to sneak out and call for help. He reaches the knights and tells him everything that happened, but he was followed by a monster, so they send him to the surface while they hold it off. After he left, Nagawa limit breaks and manages to take down one of her monsters. The demon uses a spell, so they put up a barrier to block it, but she summons some pussycats to go over and penetrate the barrier maker. Nagawa dispels the shadow but finds that she's already gone. He gets up to get revenge, but Shizuka slaps some sense into them and they begin to retreat. The knight suddenly arrives and tells them to do whatever it takes to survive as the monster comes in to give him an early retirement. Nagawa prepares to go all out and slays another monster, forcing the demon to put up a shield, but he strikes through and goes to end it. He stops because she has a family and she takes the chance to summon a horse to knock him away. Shizuka fights it in a one-on-one, but another appears to blow her back out. Kaori goes to her with the barrier maker's assistance and decides that they will leave this world together. The horses break through the barrier, but it gets made into a shish kebab as Hajime appears on the battlefield. The rest of the party comes down as the monsters get ready to be slaughtered. The demon makes a portal, but he spawn camps the monster and begins showing her the power of America. He does a devil may cry and makes all her monsters become a hashtag. The mighty turtle uses hyper beam, so he takes out his shield and reflects it at the demon to take out the bird. Then decides to feed the great turtle some fireworks. The demon feels fear and tries to use magic on him so she can make her escape, but Hajime blocks her path and decides to kindly ask her why she tried to attack them. She reveals that someone else gave her all the monsters and told her to attack them, so he decides to send her on a journey. Nagawa begs for her life, but mercy isn't in Hajime's vocabulary. They come over to Hajime where Kaori begins crying and apologizes for not saving him. He tells her that it's all right and she begins to embrace him. They continue on their journey while Nagawa begins questioning why he had to smoke her. Hajime says that anyone who stands in his way will get a free ticket to heaven and walks away from them. They leave the dungeon, so Kaori decides it's time to go over to him and joins his party, then expresses that she loves him more than anyone in this world. Hajime reveals that he's more into prison charges, so Yue accepts the challenge to show her that she loves him more. Hajime tells Kaori that they'll be leaving soon, so she says goodbye to her old party and heads off to begin her new journey with Hajime. We find our party driving through a sandstorm in the desert where a waifu war has begun. The battle begins with Yue laying claim to Hajime along with his life seeds, but Kaori counters by saying she knows him much better than her since they were classmates. However, Yue scores a devastating blow by revealing that Hajime's sword has entered her sheath on many occasions. Miu stops the fight before the FBI comes for Hajime, and they decide to postpone the battle for Best Girl. Tio gracefully comes forward and points out that there are many sandworms gathering in the distance, but they seem to be acting strangely. A sand glizzy suddenly comes up from the desert and attempts to make them lunch, so Hajime is forced to run away, but they continue to chase after him. Kaori takes the chance to give some head while Yue is restrained by Shia's face-sitter and they're forced to put her in timeout. Hajime begins driving in reverse while dodging the sand glizzies that attempts to penetrate him. He activates a weapon hidden in the harem carrier to give the poor bastards an outer body experience. Hajime continues to drive but finds even more waiting ahead of him, so he channels the spirit of America and gives them a pathway to the gates of Worm Heaven. They see a man laying in the middle of the desert and decide to check if he's the cause of this. Kaori turns him over and sees that the man is suffering from a poison that caused his mana to overload his body. She decides to use a spell to drain all the excess mana from him, but explains that the condition will return if he's not brought in for further treatment. The man awakens and believes that he has ascended to heaven, but Hajime gently reminds him that life is not that merciful. They take him into the harem carrier where he explains that he's a duke of a city, but days ago all the drinking water was polluted with poison that causes mana overload, and seeing no other option he set out to find adventures powerful enough to get the antidote from a volcano. The duke begs Hajime to help his people, and with some convincing from Miu he decides to accept the mission to save the duke's city from becoming past tense. Our party arrives in the city of Inkaji and finds that all of its residents are gone. They meet with the duke's father and explain that they've come to help with their current situation. Yue starts off by creating a gravity square to make a hole and finishes off by filling the pool to give them a clean source of water. Yue gets exhausted and begins drinking some of Hajime's fluids, then she attempts to eat his face. They head to the oasis, but Hajime says that he senses something evil swimming inside of it. He throws in some fireworks to give it a little surprise, causing a giant slime monster to erupt from the water and starts to attack them. Yue decides to give it the cold shoulder while Tio brings in the heat, leaving Hajime to use his pure and make the creature a hashtag. They tell them that the oasis will be cleared up after a while since the monster is gone, and the Duke thanks them for saving their city. They go to the room where the sick are being treated to tell the people all that happened, and announces that our adventurers will be going on a journey to recover the cure for the poison. Kaori decides that she will stay with Miu to look after the patients, but Miu reveals that Yue touched lips with Hajime today. Kaori kindly asks him why he was cuddling her lips when they're supposed to be on a mission, while Yue emotes on her. Our party begins their journey back through the desert and hand out a taste of America to the unfortunately shaped creatures until they arrive at the volcano holding the antidote. We find the door to the labyrinth and goes inside to find a staircase that leads deeper inside the dungeon. A monster suddenly confronts our party and Shia decides that she'll face it alone. She runs at her victim and begins converting her mana into physical strength to send the poor bastard to the Shadow Realm. They enter a room filled with the antidote for the city and continue walking through the dungeon. All of our party is beginning to suffer from the heat around them, but Tio for obvious reasons. They decide to take a break and hide inside a cave where the magic duo uses their godlike powers to make an air conditioner and begins enjoying the cool air. Tio theorizes that all the labyrinths are made to test the host in many different areas, and this one is to see if the candidate can think while under pressure. Hajime begins to get distracted by fun pillows and turns around to see 5 to 25 years in prison tempting him to the dark side. Our party begins using a boat as a shortcut through the labyrinth, but sees a lava fall waiting for them at the end. But quick-thinking Yue casts a spell to save them from becoming well done. Hajime noticed that they've arrived at the end of the dungeon as fireballs suddenly begin raining down upon them, but they manage to escape just in time. An army of lava glizzies blocks their way to the island on the other side and begins launching more fireballs at them. But Hajime counters the attack by blowing its body away and destroying the core. The rest of the party begins to use their powers to send the creatures to heaven until they stop spawning. But when Hajime blows off the last glizzy, a giant laser comes from the ceiling and consumes him. He manages to block the surprise attack but takes heavy damage during his attempt. Yue rushes over to Hajime to feed him a health potion and begs him to wake up, but another rain of lasers starts falling from the sky, forcing the best girl to defend her mans with everything she's got until the light show finally ends. They see many dragons flying above them with a powerful demon at their head. Hajime begins to stand back up and questions why the demon is here. Fried explains that he learned an ancient god magic and heard a voice declaring him as his apostle, so he made a vow to eliminate everyone that stands in the way of God. Hajime wants all the smoke and they begin launching attacks at Fried. He blocks all their abilities before starting the chant to summon the power of his god to use trick action so he can teleport behind of Hajime and command his blue eyes white dragon to take away his life points while the other dragons pins down his harem. Hajime gets pushed back by white lightning but summons his holy cross to defend against the demon's attack. Fried suddenly gets knocked away and sees that Tio has transformed into a dragon. She launches an attack to start a ki blast power struggle with blue eyes so Hajime can get close enough to knock him off his mount, but another dragon comes to his rescue while Tio pushes the white dragon away. Hajime runs out of strength and starts feeling gravity, but Tio comes in clutch to bring him back to his harem. The lava around them suddenly begins rising and Fried explains that he has the controller to the labyrinth, so he just opened all the seals to make the volcano explode and leaves them to perish. Hajime goes to Tio and tells her to take his ring and escape the labyrinth, but she says that she's ride or die for him. He tells her that they aren't going to fall here but defeat this labyrinth instead, but he needs her to return to Akanji and give the people the antidote. He transfers the ring to Tio and she begins flying through the skies. The other dragons begins to attack her, but she feels ecstasy from the pain and flies past them into the other rooms where she begins to reach her peak. A giant explosion comes from above, but she uses the cross to block the attack, which pushes her over the edge. Tio flies past the powerful demon while leaking her love juices all over him, but he realizes that she left him a present that blows away his expectations. Tio continues to fly towards Akanji and collapses at their gate, but Kaori runs over to her friend and carries her to a room inside the city. She tells Kaori that Hajime will be fine since he has plot armor, and they decides to take Miu to meet her parents in a nearby city. Back over to Hajime, we find our party entering the final room of the labyrinth. They enter the circle to learn ancient spatial magic, and Yue finds a hidden wall with the dungeon relic inside. The room begins to be flooded by lava, but the spatial magic comes in clutch and allows our party to survive a bath from hell. Hajime goes to his ship to swim through the volcano, but they begin to get pulled down under the wave of lava. They get spit out in the ocean but finds that sharks are after them, so Yue decides to put them into an underwater blender. They go up to the surface and immediately begins eating the wildlife surrounding them. A group of fishmen comes on the ship to protect their kind and tries attacking Shia, but he becomes a skipping stone instead. They look up to see Miu falling from the sky with Kaori riding Tio by her side, and Hajime jumps up to embrace her in his arms. Hajime's harem is back together again and they are very happy to see that he made it out alright. Our party continues their journey through the ocean until they find the land that Miu came from. They go on the dock where the soldier thanks them for bringing back the missing child, then allows them to explore the city. Miu carries the party to meet her mother and runs over to embrace her in a hug for the first time since she's been kidnapped. Miu realizes that her mother had been injured and asks her father to help her, so Hajime comes over to take her inside the home. Kaori takes a look at her leg and says that she will take a few days to heal it, but she'll be fine. Rimia questions why Miu calls Hajime father, and he tells her everything that happened up to this point. She thanks them for all that they've done and invites them to stay in her home. Hajime says that he'll find an inn, but the MILF uses Miu as a weapon to make him stay and offers some cheeks as repayment for his kindness, which makes his harem less than pleased. Our party leaves Miu behind to look for an underwater labyrinth close by. They stand under the night sky, but Hajime realizes that the relic from the previous dungeon is filling with moonlight and begins pointing the way that leads to the underwater labyrinth. They enter through the opening with strong currents pulling them along, but a monster begins coming from behind, so Hajime feeds it some fireworks to send it to heaven. They find a star in the wall and use the pendant to open another door that leads to a cave inside the labyrinth. Our party begins walking through the cavern and encounters many monsters that they easily defeat. Hajime begins complaining that the monsters seem weak, so the heavens reply by forming a slime monster. Shia tries to smash it, but the slime busts all over her chest and Tio uses flame magic to burn it away. Yue puts up a barrier to block its attack and Shia comes over to ask Hajime to rub potions on her burns. But Kaori decides to heal the wound to shaft block our furry friend. They realize that the slime burns through magic and it begins to transform into the legendary monster Tit's head. It begins attacking our party, but they return the favor to the monster. Kaori tells Yue to go fight while taking over as the shield holder, and all our fighters launch a team ultimate to make Tit's head explode. The monster begins to reform into its godlike shape and they begin questioning Hajime about its mana crystal to destroy, but he explains that the whole room is this creature's weak spot. Tit's head starts attacking and breaks through Kaori's shield and Yue is forced back into defense mode. Hajime summons his flame spitter to burn the wall of slime, so the others launch ranged attacks to distract it while Kaori just stands there being useless. Hajime notices a whirlpool and decides to use the impaler to penetrate it so he can open an escape route. The party is split apart by the currents with both waifus on opposite sides. Yue tells him to save Kaori, so he swims over just in time to carry her to the surface. Kaori questions why he chose to help her, so he explains that she would not survive on her own while Yue is an immortal vampire. The duo begin traveling through the dungeon until they arrive at a level where many abandoned ships lay in wreckage. The space around them begins to warp and they find themselves in the middle of a war at sea. Hajime tries to shoot with no effect, but Kaori is able to block it and Hajime realizes that only magic attacks work in this place. They see a man in pain, so Kaori goes over to heal him, but he gets Thanos snapped instead. She thinks that she just smoked someone, but Hajime explains that everything here is just an illusion to make her feel better. They suddenly get surrounded by pirates and Hajime blows their minds and jump away with Kaori. He realizes that the only way to escape is to send the illusion men to heaven and goes to end them. The duo find themselves back in the ship graveyard and remembering all the carnage that Hajime caused, Kaori begins freaking out. They take a break and she apologizes for being weak, but he tells her it's alright because he also freaked out in the abyss and without Yue he wouldn't have made it. Kaori admits that she's jealous of Yue, so Hajime explains that even if she becomes important to him, Yue will always be the one that he loves and she should stop comparing herself to her. They start back on their journey through the labyrinth and goes to the top of a ship. Another vision begins forming and this time they find themselves at a party between humans and beastmen. The host comes forth and thanks everyone for signing a peace treaty between their races, but says that it was an act against God for humans to mix with furry filth. A red wedding begins to take place as all the guests begin to be slaughtered without exception. Hajime notices that the host went inside with a mysterious woman by his side as the illusion begins fading away. Kaori says she's alright, so they decide to continue traveling inside the ship, but Hajime finds a string that activates an arrow trap. A heavy gust of wind suddenly appears that blows Kaori away and Hajime begins to get surrounded by soldiers. So he shows them why you don't take a sword to a pew-pew fight. He begins looking for Kaori and finds her hiding in a dark corner. She comes over to him and says that she needs a hug, but he realizes that she's acting strange, then blows her mind. He sees that she had a knife and the imposter questions why he pew her, but he double taps. The creature explains that it's holding her body hostage, but Hajime reveals that magic ammo will only cause pain with minor damages, and tells the imposter that it took someone important to him, so he'll make sure that they suffer for it. The creature decides to leave her vessel and Hajime notices that it disappeared. Kaori wakes up and decides to embrace his lips with her own. She admits that she loves him and will always be by his side, so Hajime accepts it as long as she's happy. The duo begins the journey through the labyrinth and finds a portal that leads to an underwater temple with a magic circle in the center. The other harem members arrives in another circle and Tio questions if Hajime gave Kaori his long sword, but he awards her with punishments. Kaori flexes on Yue that she kissed Hajime and he admitted that she's important to him. Yue accepts her as a worthy rival and they go into the magical circle to learn ancient restoration magic. The fallen angel tells them not to follow the way of God and leaves them to collect the fourth ancient relic. The temple begins to collapse, so Yue uses spatial magic to teleport them away, but a giant wave washes them underwater where they see that the legendary Tit's head have returned. It begins to attack and Hajime comes up with a plan to beat it, but he needs time. Tit's head evolves into the Great Swallower, but many fishes suddenly attacks the monster as the fugly fish arrives on the battlefield to lend a fin. While Hajime completes his missiles, then launch them inside the monster to turn it into fireworks and brings an end to the Great Swallower. The next day, Miu goes into Hajime's room to wake him up along with Yue, who seems to have misplaced her clothing. Everyone gathers to have breakfast around the table and Hajime decides to leave, but he can't bring himself to tell Miu the bad news. They go outside to play tag with Miu and she runs away to take home field advantage by hiding in the water. But when Shia goes to check on her, she gets a surprise as Miu steals her heaven holders. Rimia goes over to thank Hajime for taking care of her daughter and tells him that Miu will understand when he decides to go without her. Hajime says he'll tell her that he's leaving tomorrow and Rimia gets closer to show him why she's the throat goat, but his harem sensed the danger and came to put an end to it. Miu suddenly returns to give Hajime Shia's top, so the rest of his harem decides to donate their milkshake carriers to a noble cause as well. Later in the day, Miu gets the news that Hajime will be leaving soon, but she takes it like a champ and says that she'll wait for him, so he promises that one day he will come back with all his friends and introduce them to her. The next day, Miu gives the entire party good luck charms to keep them safe and Miu embraces Hajime in a hug before he leaves her behind to continue his journey to return home. We go over to the demon capital where we find Fried giving a speech to his army of monsters and begins a mass invasion of all the territories that humans have claimed for themselves. Inside the Knight's commander's office, he begins questioning why his soldiers have been acting suspicious and write letters asking Hajime for help. He hears a knock at the door and Daisuke enters the room to tell him something important. He starts to act very nervously as another knock comes at his office and the commander opens the door to find that one of his soldiers have been brainwashed. The knight goes over to divide Daisuke by two, but the commander manages to hold him off and begins casting magic. He gets stabbed in the back as Daisuke reveals that he's a rat bastard. The commander questions why he betrayed him and summons a tornado to blow everyone off. He tries to slay the traitor, but the knights come in to protect him, so the commander begins fighting a 4v1 to style on all his soldiers by putting them down and winning the battle flawlessly. Daisuke gets up from his ass beating and revives all the guards that were defeated before calling the rest of the knights to start flooding into the room. Seeing no other option, the commander decides to make a strategic retreat through the window and gets ready to blast them, but he's stopped by a mysterious woman who uses a spell to take the remainder of the commander's life points. We head over to our party traveling on the road, but they come to a stop because they see a group of people being attacked by bandits. The barrier around them begins to break apart and Hajime puts the harem carrier into gear so he can channel the American spirit to give the bandits a few extra holes in their bodies. They come to a stop so Kaori can go over to heal all the injured people that fell in the battle. It's revealed that it was the princess who created the barrier and she is introduced to Hajime, but he questions why she's all the way out here and she reveals that the kingdom is in trouble. They take her in the harem carrier where she explains that after they left with Kaori, the king suddenly started supporting the Holy Church and labeled Hajime as an enemy of God. But he started to see her as an enemy as well, so she went to seek out the teacher and saw when she got kidnapped by a nun from the church. After seeing all this, she decided to run away and seek them out to ask for help. Hajime tells the princess that he'll go save his teacher and send anyone that gets in his way to the Shadow Realm. The teacher sits in her cell while thinking about the god of Riz, so the heavens answer her prayers and send Hajime to rescue her. He opens a hole inside the prison and goes inside to take off the bracelet that the wardens attached to her. The teacher goes over to Hajime and tells him that she now knows why he had to smoke his classmates and thanks him for saving her. But he says that he made his own decisions, so she shouldn't blame herself for anything he does. They hear an earthquake in the distance and Hajime notices that an army of demons has begun attacking the capital. A flash of light comes towards them, but Hajime teleports away before they become past tense. The mysterious woman reveals that she is God's strongest apostle and has come to remove Hajime from this world, but he's ready for all the smoke. We go over to our favorite harem where they realize that the demons have started to attack the kingdom, so Yue and Shia decides to go out to deal with Freed because of what he did to Hajime. They go over to Tio and ask where the dragon commander is hiding, but Hajime contacts the horny dragon and asks her to come over to take his teacher to safety. A portal opens that obliterates the tower they were standing on, and Freed joins the battle to face off against them. He commands his Blue Eyes White Dragon to attack, but Yue uses her reverse Uno card to give his soldiers a one-way ticket to heaven. Yue begins taunting Freed, so he decides to take her in a 1v1 while the flying penguins deal with Shia. He uses tackle on our furry friend, and she decides to use spatial magic to kidnap all her future victims. The demon reveals that the red-haired bad bee they faced in the labyrinth was his lover, and he hates them because they put her on a t-shirt. But Shia explains that it was simply a skill issue and she doesn't care who they smoke to keep Hajime safe. He begins to attack, but the furry uses Future Sight to dodge all their spells and delete them from this world. The demon tells them to start using long-range attacks, but Shia summons a new weapon and comes in like a wrecking ball to knock the mutated penguins into sleep mode. The demon tries to surprise the rabbit with Future Sight and gets balls pushed in his face, but manages to land some attacks to make Shia hard. She uses restoration magic on herself, so the demon goes up into the sky to use lightning attacks and finds out just how OP seeing into the future can be. Shia ends off the fight by bondaging the demon and decides to introduce him to the floor. She flies down to the crater where the demon calls our furry a monster before taking his last breath, but she takes it as a compliment. We go over to Yue, who is facing off against Freed. She calls down a dragon from the skies, but the Gok Gok turtle sucks it in and fires back the spell towards her. Freed says he has prepared for all the bullshit she can pull, but Yue takes it as a challenge and uses all her power to summon the 5 elemental dragons. They begin to deep fry the turtle before slaughtering all the demons that are unfortunate enough to be close by. After seeing the hacks, Freed starts to use his Age of God magic to summon a nuclear bomb to wipe out everything that exists around him. Yue manages to survive that attack, but she gets penetrated by Blue Eyes. She reminds us that she's immortal and uses full counter to make Freed feel unimaginable pain. And he decides to sacrifice his remaining dragon so he can make a strategic retreat back to safety. We find Hajime fighting against Noit while trying his best to protect his teacher. She uses a spell to spit some heat, but the Holy Cross saves them from seeing Jesus. A song begins playing around them that begins to debuff all of Hajime's skills. He points out to Noit that fighting him is pointless because her kingdom is being destroyed by the demons. But she says that her god doesn't really care about the people who worship him. Hajime asks if she could get rid of him by sending him back to his own world. And Noit reveals that she won't do it because her god wants to see him suffer before he takes his last breath. She launches an aura sphere at Hajime that manages to break through his barrier, but Noit suddenly gets her back blown out against the wall as Tio arrives on the battlefield. Hajime gives her his teacher to take to somewhere that's safe while he stays to face off against the apostle. She uses flamethrower again, but he dodges and takes out his Gatling to push her away so he can swap to his sniper to try and put holes in her. Hajime goes in for a no-scope and finds that she's too strong, so he sends the Holy Cross after her, but she easily destroys all of them. Noit uses the Speed Force to get behind our MC and destroys his sniper. Hajime is forced to activate his limit break and begins to match evenly with God's strongest apostle. He realizes that if the fight continues like this he will lose and sees that she has a mana crystal inside her body. Hajime calls his remaining crosses to blow away her expectations, but both fighters survive the gender reveal party. He takes the chance to throw some discs at her, but Noit easily deflects them. He surprises her by pewing through the portals until her weapons break apart so he can bondage her with his magic rope. While she is held in place, Hajime uses the impaler to try and penetrate her body, and with a lot of effort he brings an end to this hard-fought battle. Noit congratulates him on winning before falling down into an abyss to never be seen again. He sees an explosion in the distance and goes over to see that Tio and his teacher are standing in a ruin. They explain that the teacher was trying to boost Tio's magic breath but ended up obliterating the church and sending everyone inside to the gates of heaven. The teacher begins crying, so Hajime goes to embrace her until she starts to feel better. Tio shows them that a monk is watching them and they decide to follow the stranger through the destroyed city. He points at a heap of rubble and lifts it to reveal a magical circle hiding underneath. Our party enters the portal and gets transported to a labyrinth where they begin to explore and step on another magic circle to gain ancient spirit magic. Hajime goes over and finds out that to defeat the dungeon they just needed to have no faith in God. Then he takes the relic of the labyrinth for himself. We go over to Shizuku, who is awakened by a sound outside the castle. She starts to investigate but finds that the rest of her classmates are also on edge. They go over to Amanagawa's room and find that they may have interrupted a very special moment. He decides to wake everyone inside the castle to find out what caused the explosion. When a totally not brainwashed maid runs over to report that the demon army is approaching the capital, Amanagawa decides to evacuate the kingdom. However, Eri tells him that it would be better if they meet up with the commander to find a way to defeat the demons. They go to the guard room and is told that they'll soon be meeting with the commander. The captain begins giving a speech to all the soldiers and takes out an orb that turns into a flashbang to signal the knights to begin slaying all the students that are too weak to defend themselves. The maid runs towards Shizuku while asking for her help, but she takes the chance to penetrate her back and pins the best girl to the floor. Eri is revealed to be a traitor and takes off her glasses to prove that she's truly evil. They restrain all the hurt students while Eri goes over to Amanagawa to place a dog collar around his throat. Then the crazy blind bitch attempts to eat his face. Eri tells Shizuku that she did all this to make Amanagawa hers so they can live in this world happily together, but Shizuku questions what happened to the guards. Eri explains that everyone in the castle was secretly sent to heaven and she used her necromancy skill to control them like puppets. She decides to give a demonstration by walking to her defenseless classmate and command the guard to give him an extra hole so she can use her magic to bring him back to this world as her servant. Shizuku calls her a monster, but Eri reveals that she plans to turn her into a servant and force her to smoke Kaori. She takes the sword from the guard and gets ready to make another victim, but a barrier stops the attack and explodes to push her away. Kaori arrives on the battlefield to save her classmates and goes into a trance to cast her spell. The princess defends her from the attacking soldiers, but Daisuke comes over to them and acts like he's innocent so he can get close enough to knock out the princess before going over to penetrate Kaori with his hole maker. The best girl uses her remaining strength to complete the spell and heal all of her injured classmates while her body goes limp. Amanagawa rises up on full demon time and commands his sword to return to him. He uses Getsuga Tensho to distract the guards while the rest of the class begins to free themselves so they can join him in the fight against the traitors. Amanagawa uses another Getsuga Tensho to clear a way to Eri, but he gets blocked by the revived form of the commander. Amanagawa can't bring himself to slay his old friend, so he gets overwhelmed by him. He suddenly begins to feel very sick and Eri reveals that she gave him a little present while she was tongue wrestling him earlier. The crazed bitch begins walking towards Kaori and casts the spell to turn her into a servant. But before she can complete it, Hajime arrives on the battlefield. He flash steps to Daisuke to knock him into the wall, then takes Kaori's body and gives it to Tio and the teacher so they can use ancient spirit magic on their fallen friend. Eri gets Hajime's attention and he begins to walk over to her while on demon time. A servant tries to sneak him, but he blocks it with a barrier and blows his mind. She sends the commander to fight and he asks Hajime to help him, so he sends his friend to the afterlife. Hajime summons his Gatling and begins to send all the lost souls to the gates of heaven so they can rest in peace. He continues walking over to Eri and puts his pure at her thinker, but Daisuke tries to sneak Hajime and gets introduced to the ground. He embraces the traitor's breather and Daisuke blames him for taking Kaori away from him. Hajime decides to test if he has a foot fetish and gives the demons a meal that will surely give them the runs. A giant laser comes from the sky as Freed returns to continue fighting on the battlefield. Tio says that they succeeded in attaching Kaori's soul, but they need Yue to help finish the process. So Hajime summons an orb and uses it to call down a laser that begins to annihilate all the demons that have gathered around the stadium. He tells Freed to leave before he decides to turn him into his next victim, and seeing that he's outclassed, Freed takes Eri to make a strategical retreat. Yue and Shia arrive on the battlefield and see that Kaori has been gravely injured, so they take her body to a better location to complete the healing ritual. Hajime comes over to check on them, but Yue tells him that his teacher is grieving. He goes over to her and apologizes for sending another of her student to heaven, but she says that she accepts that what he did was the right thing to do. Hajime tells his teacher to never stop mourning for those who are lost and keep her humanity intact, so one day when they return home she can teach him how to be normal again. She goes over to him and cries for all her students that perished in this world at such a young age. We go over to the stadium and finds Nagumo finishing his training. The princess comes over to him where it's revealed that her father passed away during the chaos. She looks up in the sky and finds that our main party has returned to them, but Shizuku realizes that Kaori is missing. Hajime prepares them for her new appearance as they see her falling from the sky while asking for Hajime to catch her, but he allows Kaori to have an intimate moment with the floor. It's revealed that her soul is in Noin's body and Shizuku begins to leak tears of joy while going over to embrace the friend she thought she lost. They asked why she looks so different and Kaori explains that although they were able to completely heal her body, she chose to take Noin's vessel because it was way more powerful. Hajime decides to explain to them all the secrets he found out about this world and the corruption of its god. Nagumo decides that they need to defeat the god to save the world, but Hajime tells him that all he wants to do is find a way to go home. Our party goes inside to have dinner but finds that the rest of the class has come to join them. They begin asking Hajime if they can come along with him to the next labyrinth so they can learn ancient magic to gain enough strength to defend themselves and save the people of this land. After giving it some thought, he agrees to take them along with him, but Yue realizes that he wants them to get stronger because he can use them as meat shields. His harem begins to feed him dinner and he's forced to eat everything they decide to put in his mouth. Kaori starts getting off from eating from the same fork as Hajime, but Tio is approaching her peak from licking it. She demands a reward from Hajime for all that she did to protect his teacher, and he decides to grant her one wish. Tio tells him that she wants him to penetrate her back like the first time they met, but he refuses to do it. All his classmates begins judging Hajime for what Tio described happened and starts thinking that he's a pervert, so he decides to do as she wishes and summons the impaler to penetrate her just like she wanted. The next day, everyone gathers outside the castle to take on the labyrinth in the forest and follows our party as they set out on a new adventure.
Like for a cat girl, subscribe for a waifu, and remember to stay swifty.